Far better, always, to stop at the crack and fix the foundation. Far better to let the silence speak rather than drown it in borrowed words. Over the years, I developed a rough sense of the different stages of understanding, the different levels at which someone can know something, ranging from nearly useless to genuinely powerful. Level 1, exposure. You've heard of it, you've seen the word, you could pick it out of a lineup, but you cannot explain it, you cannot use it, you have the label without the contents. This is where most people are with most things. Level 2, definition. You know what the textbook says, you can reproduce the definition accurately, you can pass a multiple choice test, but the definition is inert in your mind, it doesn't connect to anything. If someone describes the concept in disguise without using the word, you cannot recognize it, because recognition requires understanding the thing, not just the word. Level 3, explanation. You can explain it, in your own words, starting from scratch, to someone who doesn't know it. This is where it starts to get real. This is the level the Feynman technique is specifically designed to bring you to. At this level, the understanding is genuine, and you can start to actually use it. Level 4, application. You can use it to solve problems you've never seen before. You can recognize it in disguise, in unfamiliar contexts, dressed in situations that look nothing like the examples in the textbook. This requires that your mental model be not just present but flexible, that you've internalized the structure of the concept deeply enough that you can map it onto new terrain. This is the level that separates the people who pass the exam from the people who actually become scientists and engineers. Level 5, integration. You can see how this concept connects to other concepts. You can see where it came from. You can see its limits, where it breaks down, where it stops being accurate, where a different model is needed. You can generate new questions from it. You can extend it, push it into territory it hasn't been pushed into before, and see what happens. This is the level of genuine mastery. This is where creativity becomes possible. This is where science happens. The Feynman technique is an engine for moving from level 1 and 2 toward level 3 and beyond. And it works because the act of genuinely explaining is the most efficient and honest test of where you actually are on this spectrum. I want to say something that may be uncomfortable for the intelligent people in the room. This method is harder for you, not because you're less capable, because you're more capable. Because one of the many things that high intelligence gives you is an extraordinary ability to generate convincing-sounding explanations for things you don't actually understand. A person with average verbal ability, faced with the task of explaining something they don't understand, runs out of words quickly. The blankness is obvious. The gap is exposed. A highly intelligent person faced with the same task can often produce fluent, confident-sounding prose for quite a while before running out of actual substance. And the prose sounds so convincing that both the speaker and any listener may fail to notice that it contains no actual information. This is not always deliberate. In fact, it is usually not deliberate. The person doing it often genuinely believes they understand because the words come easily, and the words coming easily feels like understanding. The blank page reveals the illusion. The page has no ears to be charmed. It doesn't care how confident your voice sounds or how fluent your sentences are. It just asks, is there actual substance here? Is there actual understanding behind the words? Is there a step-by-step derivation from things we know to be true to the conclusion you're asserting? For intelligent people who have spent their entire lives receiving positive feedback from audiences charmed by their verbal fluency, this confrontation with the page can be genuinely shocking. Good. The shock is useful. The shock is the beginning. I want to describe something that happens over time if you commit to this approach, not just as a one-time exercise, but as a habit, as the default way you relate to knowledge. The first thing that happens is that your collection of things you are confident you understand shrinks dramatically. This is uncomfortable. It may feel like you're getting dumber. You're not getting dumber. You're getting more accurate. There's a big difference between knowing less and knowing more precisely what you actually know. The former is a loss. The latter is a profound gain. Once your confidence territory has been correctly mapped, the second thing that happens is that the genuine understanding you have starts to become far more powerful and useful because it's connected, because it's yours, because you built it from the inside rather than acquiring it from the outside. It is flexible in a way that borrowed knowledge is not flexible. It is available in a way that memorized content is not available. When you need it, when you encounter a problem that requires it, it is there and it responds and it generates and it connects to other things and it helps. The third thing that happens is that your learning accelerates dramatically because you now have a reliable method for actually converting information into understanding. You're no longer letting material pass through your brain, leaving nothing but the ghost of familiarity. You're actually processing it, actually integrating it, actually testing it against the blank page. And what passes the test becomes part of a growing, connected, flexible mental infrastructure that can do real work. This is the compounding interest of genuine understanding. Each thing you genuinely understand makes it easier to genuinely understand the next thing. There is a moment, and you will recognize it when it happens because nothing quite prepares you for it, when the method stops feeling like work and starts feeling like flying. This happens when your base of genuine understanding reaches a certain critical mass. When there are enough things you truly, deeply, flexibly understand that new concepts start to click into place almost instantaneously, not because they're familiar, but because you can see exactly how they connect to what you already know, and you can feel the structure of the idea from the moment you encounter it. I remember the first time this happened to me clearly. I was working on a problem in statistical mechanics, and I encountered a mathematical structure I hadn't seen before. But I could see immediately, without working through it consciously, that it was structurally identical to something in electromagnetism that I understood very well. The mapping was instantaneous. The understanding was instantaneous. Not because I'd seen it before, but because I'd understood enough related things deeply enough that the new thing found its place in my mental architecture the moment I laid eyes on it. This is what is sometimes called, misleadingly, intuition. It is not intuition in the mystical sense. It is the practical consequence of having a large, well-organized, genuinely understood body of knowledge. You cannot buy this. You cannot shortcut to it. It is built, one genuine understanding at a time, through exactly the kind of unglamorous, uncomfortable, honest work that the Feynman Technique demands. But it is reachable. I've seen it. I've experienced it. I've watched students go through the transition from careful, effortful, genuine understanding to the kind of fluid, generative, almost playful engagement with difficult ideas that marks a real thinker. Let me get concrete. Let me tell you exactly how to actually do this in enough detail that you can begin today, this afternoon, with whatever you are currently trying to learn. First, pick one thing, not 10 things, not a chapter, not a subject area. One thing, one concept, one idea. Give it a name. Write the name at the top of a blank piece of paper. Why paper? Because the computer has the internet on it, and the internet is the enemy of the blank page. The internet is an infinitely deep supply of borrowed words, and the moment you hit a gap, the moment the silence appears, your reflexes will take your hands to the keyboard and fill the silence before you've learned anything from it. Paper removes that option. Paper forces you to stay in the gap long enough to actually feel it. Second, write an explanation. Don't edit as you go. Start from the beginning. Start from what is this thing? Where does it come from? What problem does it solve? What does it mean concretely in terms of things I know are real? Don't stop to correct yourself. Don't revise. Don't judge the quality of what you're writing. Just write. Get everything that's in your head out onto the page in whatever state it's in and see what you actually have. Third, find the gaps and mark them. Go back through what you've written. Identify every place where you relied on a term without defining it. Every place where you made a logical step without justifying it. Every place where you wrote something that sounds like an explanation but doesn't actually explain anything. Circle them, underline them, mark them clearly. These are your learning targets. These are the things you actually need to work on. Fourth, go and fill one gap at a time. Take the first gap. Go to a good source and specifically, deliberately work to understand this one thing, not skim it. Actually work to understand it. Trace it back to things you know are true. Follow the reasoning. Ask why at every step. Don't move forward until the step makes sense. Then come back to the page. Explain the gap. Fill it in. Fifth, re-explain the whole thing. Once you've filled the gaps, start over from the top. Explain the whole concept again from the beginning, incorporating what you've learned. You will find that the second explanation is cleaner, more connected, more honest. Sixth, get the analogy. Once you can explain the concept clearly in plain language, try to find an analogy. What is this like? What does it work like? What other concept from a completely different domain has the same structure? The search for the analogy is not a creative writing exercise. It is a deep probe of your understanding. A good analogy, one that actually holds up, that is actually structurally parallel rather than just superficially similar, can only be found by someone who understands the concept well enough to see its structure clearly. I want to end by telling you what I think this method is really about, not as a learning technique, but as a way of being in the world. The Feynman Technique, at its deepest level, is about intellectual honesty. It is about refusing to pretend to know things you don't know. refusing to use words as if they were currency you can spend without having earned it, refusing to let the performance of understanding substitute for the real thing. This sounds simple. It is not simple. It is, in fact, one of the most difficult things a human being can practice consistently, because the forces working against it are enormous. The education system rewards the performance of understanding. Social dynamics reward the performance of understanding. It is uncomfortable to say, "I don't know," in a meeting, uncomfortable to admit ignorance, uncomfortable to ask the clarifying question that reveals you hadn't been following. And so most people, most of the time, in most situations, perform understanding rather than actually possessing it. They use the words, they nod at the right moments, they produce the expected signals, and they go home with the comfortable feeling of having understood things they have not understood. And they make decisions based on understanding they do not have. And they are confused when the decisions produce unexpected results. The method I've described will not let you do this, not with yourself, not on the blank page, in the privacy of your own honest examination. And here's what I've found after a life of applying this test to myself as ruthlessly as I know how to. The people who are willing to encounter the silence, who are willing to sit with the discomfort of genuine not knowing and do the work of converting it to genuine knowing, are not necessarily the smartest people. They are not the people who studied the most or the people with the most impressive credentials. They are the people who are honestly humble about the limits of their own knowledge, who experience confusion not as a threat to their identity but as an invitation, who understand that the gap between what they know and what they don't know is not a source of shame but a source of direction. You know what the real tragedy is? It's not the students who don't try. It's not the people who never pick up a book. They're not pretending to understand anything. They're just not engaged. And that's a different problem entirely. The real tragedy is the smart ones, the ones who work hard, the ones who study long hours and fill notebooks and genuinely believe they are building knowledge, the ones who are doing everything they were told to do and are still producing something that looks like understanding but isn't. They are working hard at the wrong thing, and no one has ever told them this, and they will go through their entire lives with this immense collection of carefully organized unfamiliarity and never understand why it doesn't help them the way they thought it would. If you are one of those people, and I suspect, if you've stayed with me this long, that you may be, then I want to say this directly: it is not too late. The method is simple. The blank page is cheap. The imaginary 12-year-old is always available. There is no concept so complex, no field so advanced, no topic so intimidating that it cannot be approached by sitting down, writing its name at the top of a page, and honestly asking, what do I actually understand about this? Start today. Start with one thing you're working on right now, one concept, one idea, one mechanism that you have been nodding at without quite wrestling with. Close the books, get the page, write the name, and see what happens. Maybe you'll discover that you understand it better than you thought. That will feel good, and you will have confirmed the foundation is solid. Or maybe you'll discover the silence. And if you discover the silence, if you open your mouth and nothing comes, or what comes is hollow and borrowed and collapses under the first honest question, I want you to know that silence is not failure. That silence is the most honest thing that has happened to you all day. That silence is the beginning of the only kind of learning that actually changes what you can do in the world. Sit with it, get curious about it, let it ask you, why don't you know this yet? And then go find out. That's all there is to it. That's the whole method. That's the secret, if it can be called a secret, that has been sitting in plain sight for decades, available to everyone, claimed by very few. The blank page, the honest question, the willingness to stay in the silence until the silence has something to teach you. Go. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Let me tell you something that happened to me once in a corridor at Caltech. A graduate student, brilliant kid, top of his class, had memorized equations the way most people memorize the words to pop songs, walked up to me and said, "Professor Feynman, I've been studying quantum electrodynamics for 3 years now. I think I finally understand it." I looked at him. I said, "Okay, explain it to me." Like I'm a freshman. He opened his mouth, and nothing came out. Not a word, not a sentence, not even a half-baked analogy. He stood there, mouth hanging open like a fish that had just been yanked from the water, staring at me with this look of absolute horror, because in that moment, that precise, terrifying, beautiful moment, he realized something that no exam had ever told him, no grade had ever revealed, no professor had ever pointed out with enough force for it to land. He didn't actually understand a single thing he had memorized. He had not understood. And there is a difference, a canyon of a difference between those two things, a difference so vast, so consequential, that it separates the people who merely know things from the people who actually think. It separates the scientists who win prizes from the ones who just collect degrees. It separates the entrepreneurs who build empires from the ones who read every business book ever printed and then die broke. It separates the humans who are alive, who engage with reality, who wrestle it to the ground, who squeeze meaning from it, from the ones who are just moving through the world with a very expensive collection of words they cannot use. That student was not stupid. He was brilliant. But he had made the most common mistake in all of human intellectual history. He had confused the symbol for the thing. He had confused the word for the understanding. And today, right now, in the next several minutes, I'm going to show you the method I developed to make sure that never happens to you again. A method so simple it will make you angry. A method so effective that once you genuinely apply it, you will never be able to fool yourself about what you know and what you don't. A method that will either force your brain to think, truly, deeply, generatively think, or expose the silence inside you with such precision that you will have no choice but to confront it and fix it. Some people find that exciting. Some people find it absolutely terrifying. Both reactions are correct. Here's something the education system never told you and probably never will. Your brain is not designed to understand things. It's designed to survive. And in the brutal, unromantic economy of survival, there is something that looks almost identical to understanding but costs about 1/10 the energy. It's called familiarity. When you read something and it feels familiar, when the words don't snag on anything, when the sentences flow smooth as water over glass, your brain releases a small reward signal, a little chemical pat on the back. Good job, it whispers to you. You've got it. Move on. And because that reward feels exactly the same, whether you've genuinely understood something or merely encountered it before, the vast majority of people spend their entire lives mistaking familiarity for comprehension. You've done this. I've done this. Every person who has ever lived has done this. You've read a paragraph in a textbook and thought, yes, I follow that, and moved on, only to discover 3 weeks later when someone asks you to explain it that the paragraph has left no impression whatsoever except the ghost of the feeling that you once read it. You've sat in a lecture and nodded along and thought, this makes sense, this all makes sense, and written nothing down, only to find the next day that the lecture has dissolved like morning fog and left no residue of actual understanding. You've watched a documentary about something, the cosmos, the economy, the human immune system, and felt educated, felt enriched, felt like you got it, and then been completely unable to explain it to your spouse over dinner. This is not a character flaw. This is not stupidity. This is the default operating mode of the human brain, optimized over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution for a world in which you didn't need to understand how the river flooded. You just needed to remember that it did, and move to higher ground when it started raining. But you are not trying to avoid a flood. You are trying to build a career. You are trying to raise children who can think. You are trying to solve problems that have not been solved before. You are trying to create, to innovate, to do something with the contents of your skull that goes beyond mere pattern recognition and recitation. For that, familiarity is not enough. You need something that most people spend their entire lives either never encountering or encountering and immediately running away from because it is deeply, profoundly, exquisitely uncomfortable. You need the experience of not knowing. I was 23 years old. I was at Princeton. I was preparing for my qualifying exams, the exams that would determine whether I would continue toward a doctorate or be politely informed that physics was not, in fact, my destiny. I had been studying for months. I had filled notebooks. I had worked through problems. I had read everything. I felt prepared. And then, about a week before the exam, I did something I hadn't done before. I closed all my books, sat down at a blank piece of paper, and tried to write down what I actually understood. Not what I had read, not what I could look up. What I understood, what I could explain from the inside out, without a textbook in front of me, in plain language, starting from first principles, step by step, as if I were teaching it to someone who had never heard any of it before. The result was devastating. There were vast territories of the curriculum where, when I actually sat down and tried to explain them to myself, I found nothing. Or worse, I found the words but no substance behind them. I found myself writing sentences that sounded smart, that used the correct terminology, that would have passed a casual inspection, but that when I tried to push on them, when I tried to ask myself why, when I tried to ask myself what does this actually mean, collapsed immediately into a kind of intellectual rubble. I realized that I had spent months doing something that looked like studying but was not studying. I had been reading and nodding and reading, highlighting, summarizing, reciting definitions back to myself. And I had accumulated a large, organized, beautifully cross-referenced collection of things I didn't understand. I had 1 week. I went back to the beginning, and this time I didn't read. This time I taught. I sat in my room alone, and I talked out loud, and I explained everything to an imaginary student who had the extremely irritating habit of asking, "But why?" after everything I said. I explained electromagnetism, I explained classical mechanics, I explained wave functions, and every time I hit a wall, every time the imaginary student asked, "But why?" and I discovered I didn't have an answer, I stopped, went to the source material, actually worked to understand it, and tried again. It was brutal. It was humbling. It was the single most effective week of learning in my entire life. I passed the exams. More importantly, I understood the material in a way I had never understood anything before, not because I was smarter that week than the months before, but because I had finally, at 23 years old, discovered the only reliable mechanism for forcing genuine understanding to occur. Teaching, explaining, taking what is abstract and private and compressed and unexplored inside your head and dragging it out into the open air where it has to survive contact with someone else's questions. People have given my approach a name. They call it the Feynman Technique. There are articles about it. There are YouTube videos. There are infographics with 4 neat little boxes arranged in a cycle with arrows between them. Most of them miss the point entirely. Not because the steps are wrong, the steps are roughly right, but because they describe the mechanics while missing the purpose. And when you don't understand the purpose of a thing, you do the thing wrong even when you follow the steps correctly. Step 1. Choose a concept and write its name at the top of a blank page. This sounds trivially simple. It is not. The moment you write the name of a concept at the top of a blank page, something psychologically important happens. You have made a declaration. You have said, "I am going to understand this." And you have created an open container that must now be filled, not with your books, not with your notes, not with other people's words, but with your own understanding. The blank page is not a neutral surface. It is a mirror. Whatever you put onto it is a direct representation of what you actually have inside your head, stripped of all the comfortable scaffolding, the textbooks to glance at, the notes to refer to, the search engines to consult. It is just you and the page and the question, what do I actually know? Step 2, explain it as if teaching a 12-year-old. Not a PhD student, not a colleague, not someone who can be impressed by jargon and will nod politely even when they don't follow. A 12-year-old, a smart, curious, relentless 12-year-old who has no reason to pretend to understand something if they don't, who will say, "I don't get it," with cheerful frankness, and who will not be satisfied with abstract terminology in the place of actual meaning. This is the step where most people discover something about themselves they did not expect. When you strip away the jargon, when you remove every term whose definition you cannot give in plain English, every phrase you use as a shorthand for something you have never actually unpacked, what remains? For some concepts, quite a lot remains. The understanding is genuine, and once you stop wrapping it in impressive vocabulary, it becomes more visible, not less. For other concepts, almost nothing remains. You take away the technical language, and you discover that the technical language was the understanding, or rather, it was occupying the space where understanding was supposed to be. This is the diagnosis. This is the moment the method starts doing its real work. Step 3. When you hit a gap, go back to the source and actually learn it. Not skim it again and feel reassured by familiarity. Not read your notes about it. Not remind yourself that you read it before and probably understood it then. Actually learn it. Actually work through it. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself, what does this actually mean concretely in terms of things I already know with certainty? Build the bridge from the known to the unknown, plank by plank, with your own hands until you can walk across it from either direction. Step 4, simplify and use analogies. Once you can explain something in plain language, try to simplify it further. Try to find an analogy. Try to connect it to something the 12-year-old already understands. This is not just a pedagogical exercise. This is a profound test of depth. An analogy is not decoration. An analogy is not a shortcut. An analogy is a bridge between two structures, and for a bridge to hold, both structures must actually be solid, and the points of connection must actually correspond. When you try to build an analogy and it collapses, when you try to say it's like, and then realize that it's not actually like that, not in any way that holds up, you've discovered something important. You've discovered a place where your mental model is incomplete or warped or built on foundations that won't bear weight. The analogy forces the model out into the open where it can be inspected. Now I want to talk about the other possibility, not the possibility where you do this and discover that you understand things beautifully, but the possibility where you do this and encounter the silence. You write the concept at the top of the page, you open your mouth or pick up your pen to begin explaining, and nothing comes. Or what comes is a string of words that, the moment you look at them, you recognize as borrowed. You recognize them as the words of your textbook, your professor, some article you read, not your words, not your understanding, not your wrestling with the thing, but someone else's finished product sitting in your memory like furniture in a house you don't own. This moment, this encounter with the silence, is the most important moment in the entire method. Most people hate it so much that they immediately reach for the book. They immediately find a reason the exercise was unfair or poorly timed, or that they would have known it if they weren't tired. They shut down the silence with noise as quickly as possible and return to the comfortable illusion that they understand things they do not understand. This is the single greatest obstacle to learning that I have ever observed in human beings, across every age group, every cultural background, every level of academic achievement. The inability to tolerate not knowing. The compulsive reaching for the answer before the discomfort of not knowing has been allowed to do its work. Because here is what the silence is, when you encounter it honestly. It is not the opposite of knowledge. It is the beginning of it. It is the precondition for it. The silence is the crack in the wall through which real learning can enter. When you encounter the silence and you stay with it, when you don't immediately rush to fill it with borrowed words, something happens that cannot happen any other way. You begin to think, not recite, not recall, not recognize, think. The generative, creative, genuinely difficult cognitive operation that actually produces new understanding, that actually synthesizes information into something that belongs to you rather than merely passing through you. The silence is not failure. The silence is the beginning of the work. I want to be honest with you about something that I spent a good deal of my career being publicly annoyed about. The educational system, as it is designed in most of the world, is optimized with breathtaking efficiency for precisely the kind of fake understanding I've been describing. It does not teach you to understand things. It teaches you to pass tests about things. And while those two activities can overlap, while genuine understanding is certainly one path to passing tests, they are not the same thing, and the incentive structure rewards the cheaper version. What does a test reward? Recall under controlled conditions, within a fixed time window of a predetermined body of information, which is to say, it rewards exactly the skill of recognizing correct answers when they appear in front of you. Familiarity, pattern matching, the ability to distinguish, yes, I've seen this before, from no, I haven't. What does genuine understanding look like in practice? The ability to apply concepts in unfamiliar contexts. The ability to explain things to people who ask unexpected questions. The ability to combine ideas in novel ways. The ability to know when your model is breaking down and you need to update it. The ability to generate new knowledge rather than just retrieving stored information. These are almost never what gets tested. And so, generation after generation of intelligent, well-meaning, hard-working human beings goes through years of formal education and emerges with heads full of information they cannot use and confidence about things they do not understand. And then they go into the world and wonder why the things they study don't seem to help them solve the problems they actually face. Why knowing the formula doesn't help them design the machine. Why having read every business book doesn't help them run the business. Why knowing the theory doesn't translate into the practice. Because knowing the formula and understanding the formula are different things. Let me tell you how this actually worked in my own research. Not in studying, in active frontier research. Every time I encountered an idea that I thought I understood, every time I thought I had grasped something, I would sit down and try to give a freshman lecture on it. Not a graduate lecture, a freshman lecture, the kind you give to people who know almost nothing and who will immediately notice if you're substituting jargon for explanation. Sometimes this was triumphant, the idea was solid, the understanding was genuine, and trying to explain it to a freshman audience actually strengthened it, sharpened the edges, clarified the connections, sometimes even revealed new implications I hadn't noticed before. But sometimes, often enough to be deeply humbling, the attempt to give the freshman lecture would grind to a halt. I'd be 2 sentences in, and I'd realize that the premise I was standing on was soft, that I had accepted something as established fact that I had never actually verified myself, that there was a step in the reasoning I had been skipping because everyone skipped it and no one had ever asked about it, And then I had two choices. I could notice the gap, declare it a detail or a technicality, and move on, continuing to build on an unexamined foundation. Or I could stop, go back, actually wrestle with the question until I understood it properly, and then continue. I always chose the second option. Not always immediately. Sometimes the stopping and going back was inconvenient, was not what I wanted to be doing that afternoon, interrupted a train of thought I was attached to, but always eventually, because I had learned, slowly, painfully, repeatedly, that everything you build on an unexamined foundation is fragile.